The Watchman, K NARAYAN. There was still a faint splash of red on the western horizon. The watchman stood on the tank bund and took a final survey. All the people who had come for evening walks had returned to their homes. Not a soul anywhere, except that obstinate angler at the northern end, who sat with his feet in water, sadly gazing on his rod. It was no use bothering about him. He would sit there till midnight, hoping for a catch. The taluk of his gong struck 9. The watchman was satisfied that no trespassing cattle had sneaked in through the wire fencing. As he turned to go, he saw, about 100 yards away, a shadowy figure moving down the narrow stone steps that led to the water's edge. He thought for a second that it might be a ghost. He dismissed the idea and went up to investigate. If it was anyone come to bathe at this hour, from the top step he observed that it was a woman's form. She stooped over the last step and placed something on it, possibly a letter. She then stepped into knee-deep water and stood there, her hands pressed together in prayer. Unmistakable signs always to be followed by police and gruesome details, bringing the very worst possible reputation to a tank. He shouted, "Come out! There! Come out of it!" The form looked up from the water. "Don't stand there and gaze! You will catch a cold! Come up, whoever you are!" He raced down the steps and picked up the letter. He hurriedly lit his lamp and turned its wick till it burned brightly, and held it up, murmuring, "I don't like this. Why is everyone coming to the same tank? If you want to be dead, throw yourself under an engine," he said. The light fell upon the other's face. It was a young girl's, wet with tears. He felt a sudden pity. He said, "Sit down. Sit down and rest. No. Go up 2 more steps and sit down. Don't sit so near the water." She obeyed. He sat down on the last step between her and the water, placed the lantern on the step, took out a piece of tobacco and put it in his mouth. She buried her face in her hands and began to sob. He felt troubled and asked, "Why don't you rise and go home, lady?" She spluttered through her sob, "I have no home in this world." "Don't tell me! Surely you didn't grow up without a home all these years?" said the watchman. "I lost my mother when I was 5 years old," she said. "I thought so," replied the watchman, and added, "And your father married again, and you grew up under the care of your stepmother." Yes. How do you know?" she asked. "I am 65 years old," he said, and asked, "Did your stepmother trouble you?" "No, there you are wrong," the girl said. "She is very kind to me. She has been looking after me ever since my father died a few years ago. She has just a little money on her hand left by my father, and she spends it on us." The watchman looked at the stars, sighed for the dinner that he was missing. "It's very late, madam. Go home." "I tell you, I have no home," she retorted angrily. "Your stepmother's house is all right from what you say. She is good to you." "But why should I be a burden to her? Who am I?" "You are her husband's daughter," the watchman said, and added, "That is enough claim." No, I won't live on anybody's charity." "Then you will have to wait till they find you a husband." She glared at him in the dark. "That's what I do not want to do. I want to study and become a doctor and earn my livelihood. I don't want to marry. I often catch my mother talking far into the night to her eldest son, worrying about my future, about my marriage. I know They cannot afford to keep me in college very long. It costs about 20 rupees a month. 20 rupees! The watchman exclaimed. It was his month's salary. How can anybody spend so much for books? Till today, she said, I was hoping that I would get a scholarship that would have saved me. But this evening they announced, others have got it, not I. My name is not there. And she broke down again. The watchman looked at her in surprise. He comprehended very little of all this situation. She added, and when they come to know of this, they will try to arrange my marriage. Someone is coming to have a look at me tomorrow. Marry him and may God bless you with 10 children. No. She cried hysterically. I don't want to marry. I want to study. The silent night was stabbed by her sobbing, and some night bird rustled the water, and wavelets beat upon the shore. Seeing her suffer, he found his own sorrows in life came to his mind. How, in those far-off times, in his little village home, an epidemic of cholera laid out his father and mother and brothers on the same day, and he was the sole survivor. How he was turned out of his ancestral home through the trickery of his father's kinsmen, and he wandered as an orphan, suffering indescribable hunger and privation. Everyone has his own miseries, he said. If people tried to kill themselves for each one of them, I don't know how often they would have to drown. He remembered further incidents and his voice shook with sorrow. You are young and you don't know what sorrow is. He remained silent and a sob broke out of him as he said, I prayed to all the gods in the world for a son. My wife bore me 8 children. Only one daughter lives now, and none of the others saw the 11th year. The girl looked at him in bewilderment. The taluk of his gong struck again. It is late. You had better get up and go home, he said. She replied, I have no home. He felt irritated. You are making too much of nothing. You should not be obstinate. You don't know my trouble, she said. He picked up his lantern and staff and got up. He put her letter down where he found it. If you are going to be so obstinate, I will leave you alone. No one can blame me. He paused for a moment, looked at her, and went up the steps. Not a word passed between them again. The moment he came back to duty next morning, he hurried down the stone steps. The letter lay where he had dropped it on the previous night. He picked it up and gazed on it, helplessly, wishing that it could tell him about the fate of the girl after he had left her. He tore it up and flung it on the water. As he watched the bits float off on ripples, he blamed himself for leaving her and going away on the previous night. I am responsible for at least one suicide in this tank, he often remarked to himself. He could never look at the blue expanse of water again with an easy mind. Even many months later, he could not be certain that the remains of a body would not come up all of a sudden. Who knows? It sometimes happens that the body gets stuck deep down, he reflected. Years later, one evening, as he stood on the bund and took a final survey before going home, he saw a car draw up on the road below. A man, a woman, and 3 children emerged from the car and climbed the bund. When they approached, the watchman felt a start at his heart. The figure and face of the woman seemed familiar to him. Though altered by years and ornaments and dress, he thought that he had not recognized the face. he had once seen by the lantern light. He felt excited at his discovery. He had numerous questions to ask. He brought together his palms and saluted her respectfully. He expected she would stop and speak to him, but she merely threw at him an indifferent glance and passed on. He stood staring after her for a moment, baffled. "Probably this is someone else," he muttered, and turned to go home, resolving to dismiss the whole episode from his mind.